You are now live.
We are now live, okay. We're going to continue our discussion of 738. This is miscellaneous tax, which was short and sweet and is becoming longer and less sweet. We're here to talk about, we had Representative Briglin came in the other day and presented a proposal his committee had been working on, but hasn't voted out, I gather, on a way to help the systemic deficit that E911 has been dealing with for the last few years. And Maria, can you walk us through what that proposal is?
Sure, I would be happy to do that. I believe you have in your folders a copy of the draft. It's draft 1.5, and at the top it says proposal to amend the contribution method for the Vermont Universal Service Fund.
Okay, I have to find my committee first here.
And it's also posted online.
That's
on the website.
It's in Briglin.
Is it under?
It may be under, I think it is under Representative Briglin's name. If not, it might be under my name. And that was last Friday.
We got one and it looks nice and officially drafted. It is under Representative Briglin's name.
Okay, then that is exactly the one. So we'll just quickly recap and walk through this. Representative Briglin gave a great description of the context and of the proposal. Again, this concerns the contribution method to the Vermont Universal Service Fund. Right now, there is a 2.4% charge on retail telecommunications. The proposal here is to change that contribution method to a flat fee for each line in service, essentially, and we'll read through the definitions. And that flat fee would be 70 cents per line, except with respect to the prepaid wireless services. So you'll remember several years ago, you changed the collection method for prepaid wireless to be collected at the retail point of sale. So that charge is collected by retailers, similar to the way they collect the sales and tax in Vermont. So that is being left alone. If you were going to change that contribution method, that would require some administrative software updates. But the proposal here is to leave prepaid wireless alone, but for all other services to now switch to a 70-cent charge, and that charge would be monthly. Okay, so we'll just look at the draft. Section W, the first proposal just changes, this is the statement of purpose for Chapter 88, which concerns the Vermont Universal Service Fund, and it just strikes the reference to a proportional charge, because now it's going to be both a flat fee and a proportional charge, depending on the type of service. Then the real substance is in Section X. I'm sorry, was there a question?
No.
Okay.
I think that's noise in the hall.
Okay, got it. Okay, so Section X, the rate of charge. So it starts by stating, except as provided in subsection 7521E, and that's the section that pertains to prepaid wireless. So again, they're being carved out and left alone. The rate of charge shall be 70 cents for each retail telecom service line capable of accessing the 911 system. So these are voice services only. There are federal limitations in terms of expanding that charge to broadband subscription service, as you know. And it should specify, because it does not specify here, that that's a monthly charge in the same way that the 2.4% is collected monthly now.
Okay, so we need to add month.
So that needs to be clarified. Subsection B, this is the carve out where several years ago you said of that 2.4%, 0.4%, when you raised it to
Yeah,
4/10, you specified that that money would go towards broadband, specifically then the connectivity initiative. Last year, when you created the Vermont Community Broadband Board and those grant programs, you directed that that money, that 0.4%, go specifically to the new broadband fund for broadband deployment. So that's about 1/6, 16 to 17% of the money that's collected goes specifically to that fund. So that's not changing. And so the language that's reflected here, from the monies collected by the universal service charge under this chapter, 17% is transferred to the fund. So then section Y, down on line 15, this is just the prepaid wireless. So again, specifying that that's still going to be, well, you'll see on line 17, 2.4% charge. And then finally, this change in the contribution method would take place on September 30th of this year. And just to very quickly recap, the fund right now raises just under $6 million. It funds essentially 4 programs: Lifeline, Relay Service, 911, and also the Vermont Community Broadband Board, broadband grants. There's about $1 million shortfall. And because of the way the fund is structured, Lifeline, the Relay Service, they get paid first. There's kind of a list of priorities in the payment, as well as the fiscal agent that administers the fund, and then 911. And so 911, I believe, and Barb Neal can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think their budget is about $5 million. So but by the time all of those programs and the revenue needs are calculated, it's about $1 million shortfall. As Representative Briglin explained, that 70-cent charge is estimated to raise about 7.4 million. So a little bit more than is currently needed, but a little bit of a cushion if programs do grow. And that analysis was done by the Agency of Administration, and you have a copy of their report if you want to kind of just go over some of those figures there. So that's really all that I had to say, and I'm sure you'll hear some great testimony.
okay, committee, any questions for Maria at this point? Okay.
So I missed Friday. I get the concept, and so we're taking out the 2%. We're putting in 70 cents for each retail telecommunications service line. So in my case, I have a family plan, so there's, I think, 4 phones. So that would be oh dear, $2.80 a month, 4 times for each line.
That's correct. And you're actually raising a good point that has been dealt with differently in other jurisdictions. For example, some jurisdictions, for just that situation, they might not charge the full 70 cents per line. They might charge a lesser amount for each additional line in a household or under a plan. So that's just to, give you some ideas that there is flexibility there, and different states have addressed that differently. The other area that this comes up in is with respect to institutions, businesses, or schools that might have a lot of telephone lines in service. So their fees may go up. That's something you'll need to hear more about from the administration in terms of the impact on how different entities that have many lines in service might potentially be charged higher amounts. So,
Yeah, interesting. But the concept here is that we make up the shortfall, right? So it raises $1 million, whatever, we're about $1 million shy
We're
every
about
year.
$1 million shy, but I don't need.
that's my understanding, that this would fully fund, based on at least this year's budgets, the programs that it's designed to fund.
And is there new payers that come under this, or is it just that everybody pays a little bit more?
It's not intended to expand or contract the scope of services, the retail telecommunications, the voice services that are subject to the fee. So how it balances out what the numbers are, that's part of what the administration did in estimating what the revenue would be. So they could probably talk more specifically about that, but.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Maria? Okay, we're gonna go over to Barb Neal. Barb, welcome. Tell us your thoughts. We played with this fund numbers more than once. Is this giving you enough of a cushion, do you think, to go forward? We're not back here in 2 years.
Well, first off, for the record, I'm Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the 911 Board. And I do have some thoughts on that very point, Madam Chair. I'll start just with, an overview. As you all know, that we've historically been funded by the Vermont Universal Service Fund, and you're keenly aware of the struggles with those revenue shortfalls. Earlier this year, the administration recommended that funding for the 911 program be moved to the general fund. And that recommendation was reflected in our FY23 budget request of just under $4.6 million for the board's operating costs. And I stress operating costs because that did not include a set aside that we typically or historically had in place for future system planning. And I'll circle back to that in a minute. Excuse me. I'm aware also that the House Appropriations Committee recommended 911 continue to be funded by the Vermont Universal Service Fund to the extent it could support it, with the anything that exceeds that capacity of the fund would come from the general fund. And then, of course, we have the amendment today being discussed about how to these proposed changes to the way the revenues come into the Vermont Universal Service Fund. So the 911 board is not opposed to any approach that will ensure reliable and sustainable funding mechanism for 911 operations and for properly planning for the continued health of the statewide 911 system, so that we can ensure that it continues to be, as it always has been, one of the best in the nation. And on the latter point of 911 planning, I just want to make you aware that historically, as I mentioned, we have set aside funds each year for the purpose of future system planning. Because of the revenue shortfalls in the Universal Service Fund over the past several years, we've not been able to support that carry forward. Those funds would go into our special fund, the 911 special fund, and then be carried forward. So that has not been possible due to the revenue shortfalls that exist today. And then in both FY22 and FY23, those funds were not included in our budget request. In FY22, the reason for that was that we were attempting to live more within our means of the special fund revenue, which we knew could not support our operations, nor this planning reserve. So in FY23, with the recommendation from the administration that we be moved to the general fund, that line item was left out of FY23 because general funded IT programs and projects have a different process for planning upgrades like this and projects like this. So if we were to transition to a newly structured universal service fund as proposed, one question I have, and Maria did answer this to some extent, is whether or not that fund would generate sufficient revenues to support our program, our operations, and this future planning. And to just make you aware that there is this need that's lingering out there, wherever it may fit in this conversation. I don't have the
need is your future planning fund.
Yes. So because we haven't been able to have this set aside for a few years, we're going to be looking in FY25, probably in the area of 1.5 million for system upgrades and
okay, so that's your upgrades, that's your technical resources, not just for planning. It's really upgrades or expansion kinds of things.
For the 911 system itself,
yes.
Correct.
Okay.
For the system itself. There may also be, just so you're aware, additional requests, smaller requests for other operational improvements to better serve Vermonters, but the specifics on that haven't been worked out yet. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. Traditionally, as Maria mentioned, our budget requests have come in the $5 million mark or slightly under when they included that line item for the set aside for the upgrade projects that we were just discussing. And then finally, I just want to add too that any funding mechanism for 911, we would want to make sure that Vermont is meeting all of the federal requirements related to 911 fee diversion, which can, among other consequences, impact potential access to federal funding dollars. Now, in my review of all of these various proposals, there doesn't seem to be anything that's in conflict with that, but it's something I think you should be aware of as you continue the conversation. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions as the chair sees fit.
Okay. Any questions, Senator Brock?
There's just one question regarding the proposed change of the method of charge from 2% to 70 cents for each retail line. The 70 cents, there's no mention of for what period. 2% is
per month.
Per month.
But it doesn't say
No,
that.
she
does it?
commented
Yeah.
that earlier.
Oh, she did,
Yeah,
okay.
before you
Before I
came
got
in.
it. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a technical.
Okay.
The 2% is 2.4 is your month. It's on, yeah, everything's per month.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? So Barb, you think? Sounds like this is going to raise, we think, a little over $7 million. You're saying you were at 5 something, pushing 6, including.
No, typically 5 has been the top, generally.
The top of you. Did that include your future?
That did include the future planning.
Okay.
So yes, that included future planning, which has not been included for the past several years. So there's going to be this ask at some point in the next fiscal year or two for what's going to be needed for our system upgrades.
Okay, so was the plan, how much were you putting into that?
We were putting in $300,000 each year.
Okay, so if we gave you this entire increase, that should make up and then some for the 2 or 3 years you've lost revenue.
I don't know I am not familiar with the amounts that are allotted, if you will, or designated for the other programs that are served by the Vermont Universal Service Fund. So perhaps Clay could give you better information on how all those numbers would come together. And keep in mind that we're down on the list, right? So
we're at the bottom, yes.
Yeah, the other programs would receive their funding first. So how all those variables come together, I think is a question better for Clay.
Okay.
Or June, sorry, or Commissioner Tierney.
Anyway, okay, any other questions for Ms. Neal? I'm not seeing any, so we'll go on to Commissioner Tierney. Welcome, Commissioner. We haven't seen much of you this year, and last year you were a permanent resident in this room, or at least on this screen.
I thought I'd give you folks a break from me. I hope you've enjoyed
I have a
it.
feeling you might like a break from us, but.
Never. We've had our moments, but I enjoy your committee, and it's. I think if you look at the body of work we've done, it's been a productive partnership. Today's testimony is perhaps an area where we have to respectfully disagree, but I think the testimony you've heard so far is indicative of how much thought has been going into cracking this particular nut. I believe my colleague, Secretary Farnham, is in the room with you. Is that correct?
He is here, yes.
Yes. And Doug will speak to particulars about the report that the legislature commissioned and the administration's position as to why we thought the general fund funding for E911 would be best. Clay came prepared today to give you the type of overview that Maria Royal covered, I think, pretty well. And I'll let Clay speak to whether there's anything that he would add in addition to what Maria said. As for to put the fat in the fire, so to speak, as a preview, the administration is not supportive of the amendment that Representative Briglin has very thoughtfully put forward. I don't think that will come as a surprise, but Doug can speak in greater detail to that point. Clay, was there something you would add?
No, I came prepared today to talk about, the fund generally, give you all an overview of how the fund works and the revenue shortfall that we are experiencing, and high-level comments on the transition to a fixed fee. But like June said, I think Maria did a good job.
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether she underscored this point, so I will. The flat fee mechanism is a prevalent mechanism in the country, so it's not unheard of to do it this way, if that helps the committee at all. At this point, if you don't have questions for me or for Clay, Secretary Farnham could probably make some remarks.
Okay, Senator Pearson has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Did you just say it is the prevalent?
It is. That is my understanding. Yes.
And then you said something after that, which I couldn't make out. So you said it is the prevalent, so it's not something.
It's not unheard of. It's not. It's not.
Unheard of.
Yeah, or it's not. It's new to Vermont, but it's not a new approach to how to stabilize these funds.
Yeah.
The fact that the fund is in stress or distress, that is a common issue nationwide as well.
So it is prevalent, but it's your position that you'd rather supplement the fund from the general fund than fix the problem this way.
So the administration undertook the study that was commissioned by the legislature, and that was the conclusion of that study group, that this should be put on solid footing, that should come from the general fund, instead of depending on it would not be as volatile if it were a fixed fee as opposed to the percentage that Vermont's been collecting in the past, but both mechanisms are more volatile than a general fund appropriation. And at this point, if you want to go into further details about that position, I think Secretary Farnham should speak to that.
Okay. We will go to Secretary Farnham. Come back to your new role.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Deputy Secretary Farnham, Agency of Administration, Douglas Farnham. Sorry, woman. I am happy to be back in committee. Sorry, I haven't had an opportunity to speak to Senate Finance recently. And as Commissioner Tierney said, I think there's a lot of nuance here. So I do want to step back and say, yes, the GovRec budget we proposed that the 911 services come out of the general fund. The primary logic for that proposal is that E911 services are the quintessential example of necessary, essential government services. And if something is necessary and essential, it's not like we can choose not to do it. We have to fund 911. We have to provide the services because people could die. People will die if we don't have a fully functional 911 structure. So like public safety, that puts it in our opinion, more appropriately in the general fund. Special funds traditionally are used in fees in particular for activities like a permit where you're paying a fee because you're doing a voluntary action and the fee is meant to offset the government cost. But we would never refuse someone 911 services because they didn't have a phone or didn't pay the 911 fee. So there's no direct connection between the activity and the fee. And the Universal Service Fund was initially established to expand telephone service to rural areas of the state. So the original statutory purpose is much more in line with the Universal Service Fund paying to make sure more Vermonters have access to phones. Now that was traditionally landlines, so the governor proposed to use that revenue to help expand cell phone access for rural areas of the state. So that was the fundamental logic behind the recommendation of the governor this year.
Okay, so you were taking E911 out of the universal service charge and using that 5 million or whatever they've been getting for cell towers, is that right?
Yes,
And that did not make it into the budget in either body?
it did not.
Okay,
I think maybe partly because of budget pressures, partly because of a different view of
I was
Of
told
that
today there
policy
was some
position.
concern about subsidizing major cell carriers.
I think that is also a concern in the legislature right now. I would grant that that's a very complicated topic, right? It's not a
Yes,
simple proposition.
Sure it is, and no one talked to us from the budget, but I understand that it is there, okay.
So the report basically framed out what some other states are doing. Just from a pure former tax nerd, still tax nerd at heart, the flat fee structure is slightly more regressive, but it does stabilize the income stream for most states that use it this way. And it is, it's stable and it's also approaching de minimis volumes to where the difference between the percentage and the flat fee is not overly persuasive, right? It's not massively impactful. But to Senator Pearson's question earlier, some states do choose to modify the flat fee to account for multiple lines in a family so that families don't bear the pressure of every additional line as if they were single member households. That's one reason the report proposed this as an avenue for the legislature to explore, but we stopped short of making a recommendation because we didn't feel we had time to fully explore, how it would impact families, how it would impact businesses. So I think the flat fee structure is promising, but it is blunt. There are some shortcomings to it. But I do think the current percentage-based structure also has shortcomings in that different companies can structure their plans differently and they can minimize the amount exposed to this fee and increase their data chart. People can play all kinds of games with it.
Heard that.
So I don't think the flat fee by itself is something the administration would necessarily oppose if it wasn't raising additional revenue. I think that's the crux of the disagreement at this point, is that at a time when we have unheard of general fund surpluses and additional federal funds, it doesn't make sense to the administration to raise additional taxes, because this really is more of a tax from a philosophical standpoint than a fee, even though it's legally called a fee.
Who defines cell service as a right or a privilege? Senator Hardy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if this is a question for Deputy Secretary Farnham or just the
Throw it out.
What Can someone remind me the current status of the, what is in the big bill? And what is status quo in terms of in the building?
For my understanding, the status quo is we are still at the 2.4% charge on your phone bill, and that's voice only, not. And that I think is what
Right.
Secretary Farnham said, you can define differently.
But what's their budget? And has
The
their
budget, as I asked a few minutes ago, the proposal was to put the cost to be 911 into the general fund and to use the money from the universal service charge to fund new cell towers. And
That was the governor's proposal.
that was and that did not make it into either version of the budget.
So what's the status of your budget, Ms. Neal, in the big bill at this point?
My understanding is that that would follow the recommendation that came from House Appropriations. If I'm understanding the process correctly, which is to fund us through the existing, I think they meant the existing Vermont Universal Service Fund to the extent that it is capable of funding us. And then anything that exceeds that capability would come from the general fund. That's my understanding of House Appropriations recommendation. And I hope that.
Okay, you did say that. I'm sorry. Yep. Okay. And what is the total budget?
This year is just under 4.6 million.
Okay.
And I'll just put an asterisk on that. That's without that set aside fund, but I think we can table that part of the discussion for now. So it is just under $4.6 million for operating the 911 system.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're gonna go on to Sarah Davis. Sarah, I see her name. There she is, popped up. Sarah, just introduce yourself, tell us who you represent, and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. My name is Sarah Davis, and I represent Consolidated Communications. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs. I had testified before Representative Briglin's committee on this same issue. Generally, Consolidated is supportive of changes from percentages to flat-based fees. And the reason that Consolidated supports that is that its customers tend to be assessed more money on a percentage of intrastate retail revenue than wireless customers, for example, because of allocations of revenue between data and voice. Consolidated has tariffed fees for voice. Those fees flow to intrastate revenue. That's where the percentage comes out. So on a customer for customer basis, landline customers are disproportionately assessed to these fees. And obviously all communications use the 911 system and the other services that are supported by these fees, and particularly VCBB, which supports specifically everyone but Consolidated Communications. So Consolidated, takes the position that we should generally make these fees flat-based fees so that every access line that is reaching 911 is able to do that. It stabilizes the fee because access lines generally lines don't tend to take the big dips that traditional landlines have in the past, which is why you keep seeing a declining fund. People tend to have a line to reach 911. It just may be by a different mode than they've had in the past. And that's where the changes in the fund go. To the extent that this represents a significant increase or over funds this mechanism, that's something that Consolidated would not be supportive of. And we can't really speak to the 70 cents. That seems high from what we've seen other places with respect to the total amount. And so if there's significant overfunding and it creates an obligation on consumers that's higher than needed, other than providing a slight cushion, of course, which is responsible. Consolidated would be concerned with that. We think you should collect the money needed to support 911, to support TRS, et cetera, but not over collect from consumers of voice services. So the 70 cents, we just don't have a way of assessing that. We don't get reports on other people's lines. We know how many we have, obviously, but don't know how many other people have. So we think it's prudent to maybe take a look at that and make sure that's consistent. Our other general concern is that, and this was touched on by Maria, that we should be cognizant of putting some sort of limitation, upper limitation on a customer account and the number of lines it can have. The state of Vermont, for instance, schools, hospitals can have large numbers of lines, and that can create a really large obligation that maybe is not intended. So a lot of states deal with that by putting a cap per customer account, a maximum of 25 lines or something like that, just so that a school district doesn't incur this big unbudgeted expense. Though that's what can happen if you don't do something like that. So, in general, we believe it's a more fair mechanism to collect the fees, collect flat-based fees, and to spread those equally among all users of the 911 system. But we do think that should be adequately matched to what is needed for the fund. And we just don't have a way of assessing the 70 cents.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
I have a question for Maria. Would that be all right?
Yeah.
I think
Maria,
she's
I guess
still
is
there.
here. If she is.
Hi, Maria. Our 2.7% or whatever it is that's currently there, is that assessed on the 2,000 lines at UVMMC, for instance? Or do we have, or maybe Clay or somebody else knows, but we don't deal with this volume issue currently in our current construct, do we?
Right. Maria, if you don't mind, I can.
Sure,
take that
go ahead,
question.
Kelly.
Thank you. It's dealt with differently because it's 2.4% of all telecommunications services. So a large institution is just going to pay 2.4% on the total amount of retail telecommunication services. And that really gets to the problem that the fund is experiencing because of these bundled packages. For instance, on the residential side, most of the revenue is allocated to non-assessable charges. And even on the business side, there are non-assessable charges. For instance, a company might sell you the VoIP lines for $1 a line and then rent you the phone for $40. So it's a $41 per kind of phone and service fee, but you're paying 2.4% on the $1. I did reach out to the to ADS on this question, and on many of their VoIP lines, they're paying about 3 cents a line per month to the State Universal Service Fund. So that would increase to 70. On the wireless side, I looked at my own wireless bill. I'm paying 16 cents a line, so that would move up to 70. So the impact on business customers, could be more significant simply because the actual telecommunications amount that's being assessed is very low as a component of the entire bill.
Thanks.
Okay, so one of the problems we've got is that there is no set amount or hard definition. So depending on how the provider packages their bundles, the bulk of your bill could be accredited to cable service or could be accredited to whatever, and a very small percentage can be done to actually charge for the voice going back and forth. But you can rent me, a box, you can rent me a Wi-Fi system, And none of that gets, so it's 2.4%, but a very small section of many bills. And I'm assuming that works because it doesn't cost the provider anything and it helps keep their bills down. No.
Yeah, that's the strategy.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm looking now, I'm sure I pay $1.56.
and you go up to
I go up to
280.
280, yeah.
Yeah, I would go up to $1.40, and I'm quite sure I'm not paying $1.40 on my bill. Okay. Okay, any other questions, Ms. Davis?
No, I take that back. I'm paid 13 cents for the Vermont service charge.
13%.
13 is a part. Which is why the fund's in trouble, I guess.
Yeah. And you've got 4
Traditional-
lines.
Yeah.
Traditional
Okay.
landline companies have to allocate the full voice service
Yeah.
to intrastate, but cell phone companies, correctly or incorrectly assume you're using mostly data and apply, 95% of that bill to data. That's probably a fair assumption, but with supporting a 911 system that over 70% of the calls are from wireless providers, it creates a mismatch. And that's why most states have moved to this mechanism.
Yeah, but I'm paying 13 cents a line.
Okay. So we're gonna move on to Kim Gates, Franklin Telephone. Kim, welcome back.
Thank
Spent
you.
a lot of time with us last year.
I did. So for the record, my name is Kim Gates. I'm with Franklin Telephone Company. I am the Controller General Manager, and it's a family-owned and operated telephone broadband company in serving parts of the towns of Franklin, Highgate, and Sheldon. As far as switching this to a percentage to a flat line fee, I got a lot of other stuff on my plate, so it doesn't really matter to us. My concern, couple concerns, is the big concern is low income subscribers. So Lifeline customers now have lower bills, and when you swap to this per line fee, they are going to pay a higher percentage than a regular customer. So I'm not sure if that has been taken into consideration.
We're just starting on this one, but yes, if you have multiple phones or
No, not even multiple phones. So there's a
higher
federal,
percentage.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
a federal Lifeline program if customers qualify for that gives them a reduction on their phone bill of $15 and something.
okay,
So we have customers that are paying $14 or $15 a month for their local service. And when you do the percentage, it's it's not very much, but when you go to a flatline fee, the people that can least afford it are going to pay more.
okay. Well, depending on how many lines and what they're, yeah, all right, but they're limited no matter how many calls they make, right? You don't do that anymore, okay.
It's not even the calls. I mean, they qualify for this program because
Right.
they're
So
income
they're-
level.
Okay,
Madam Chair.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Ms. Gates. That's a good point. I'm wondering if anybody on the screen has data on how many of those Lifeline customers there are statewide in Vermont. Commissioner, do you know, or Clay?
Yeah,
They
I
would have to know. I don't know.
Thank you. I can look up that number for you. It's low. It's under 10,000 customers. I mean, not that's low. That's a lot of people in Vermont, but it ranges just under 10,000, and it's been declining over the years.
you think you could get us that number, and also what are the qualifications for the program, like income levels or whatever, or qualifications to get in the program?
Sure, happy to do that.
Thanks.
Okay. Any questions here? Ms. Gates? Okay,
I have one.
one more, Senator Hardy.
I know you're a small telecom company. We got to know you a lot last session. So it's nice to see you again, but from an administrative perspective, does it matter to you either way if it's a 2.4% or a flat fee, or does that make a difference?
I don't think it makes a difference. We have to notify customers of a rate increase with 45 days notice. So the September 1st, that should be adequate time. And I don't think it makes a difference whether it's percentage or flat line as far as billing. It's when you start carving out people saying, oh, you have multiple lines, so you don't have to pay the full 70 cents. That can be challenging.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. You've given
Thank you.
us a lot to think about. And I'm sure we will get back to this. I'm not sure we're gonna have time to finish it, but we'll keep working on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
We
Thank you.
at 4 have Abby and Graham with us. I don't think we can get them before that. So we're going to continue just our discussion on 738. Senator Brock has a proposed amendment, which I will pass out now, and then you can all misplace. But we will, I guess Abby is prepared to
Abby will
talk
be
about
here.
that,
She will
so
be,
we will
yes.
talk about that at 4 o'clock. It has to do with taxation of our expenses. Some of this,
Senator Brock, do you want to send it to me so I can post it online?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Faith, I meant to remind Senator Brock and forgot. Okay, we can go off live for about 10 minutes and we will be back.
Ending live stream now.
Okay.